Hello dear friends, in this lesson we're going to create our first workflow for GitHub Actions. On the screen you can see the documentation for GitHub Actions. It's great documentation that will serve as an additional guide, and we'll often refer to it throughout this course. I'll attach the link to it in the materials for this lesson. To create our first workflow, we need to have a repository on GitHub and a project on our local machine. As a project, I created empty directory and made an index.yaml file in it. It's an absolutely empty file, just a body and HTML. Basically, it doesn't really matter what files you have in your directory. We just need a project where we to do some manipulations. And we also need a repository, so I'm going to GitHub to create a new repository. I'll call it GitHub Actions, a public repository. Great. The next step, I need to link my local folder with the folder on GitHub. So we can either use this tab, whichever is more convenient for you, or we can open the terminal. The first thing we're going to do is initialize the repository. I'm going to do this through the terminal. So I'm typing the command git init. Next, I need to add this file. And I'll write the text for my first commit. Fantastic. At this point, what we need to do is establish a connection by linking it properly. Once that is done, we can proceed to execute and run our entire project smoothly. This step is crucial to ensure everything functions as expected. Great. We have our project on GitHub, and now we can see it. Our hands are free to create our first workflow. We can create it right here on the website by going to the Actions tab and clicking on this link to set up a workflow. GitHub will suggest a template and then just ask us to commit it, but we're not going to do it that way. We're going to do it ourselves through the code editor. So let's go back to our code editor. As you remember from previous lessons, we can create as many workflows as we need. The only requirement from GitHub Actions is a special directory so it knows where to find these workflows. So, at the root of our site, we need to have a folder named .github. Next, in this folder, we need to have another folder called Workflows. And in this Workflows folder, we can create our workflows in YAML format. So we're going to create our first workflow. And let me remind you that our format can be either a 3-letter email or a 4-letter email like this. I usually write 3 letters. I think I made a mistake here. Since it allows us to have many workflows, the folder, I guess, is called Workflows, not Workflow, so I better fix this right away. And the second point is that it specifically requests me to log in to my GitHub account, because I installed an additional extension called GitHub Action. I also recommend you install it. It adds extra tools to the editor. So I'll log in to GitHub Action on the site. Alright, great, I'm logged in. And now let's start writing our workflow. The first parameter it needs is a name. We need to give it a name. So when it comes to the file name, you're free to choose whatever name you like. Recommend something thematic. The same goes for the name. You're free to use any name you like. In our case, it's simply first workflow. The second parameter we need to set is the event, meaning when. We write on and pass the event for a push, like this. Notice that when I hover over the push, it tells me that there are missing jobs. Thanks to the fact that I installed GitHub Actions, which is an additional plugin, it also pulls in various documentation and checks, and it sees that something isn't right here. You see, I passed 2 parameters, but this workflow won't work because I also have to pass jobs. Therefore, as the next parameter, I pass jobs. You see, I emphasize it does not disappear. So I recommend always installing these applications. In the previous lesson, we mentioned another application. This is YAML, which checks the syntax of the YAML format. I also recommend installing it so you have it. As for jabs, I remind you that we can have one or many jabs. In our first auxflow, there will be only one. So I go to the next line and have to give it a name. I can also come up with the name for this job myself. So here, I'm defining the syntax for that name. I'll write something like run. First, I'll have something like this, or perhaps maybe, such as, for example, or something similar, or something like that, or something along those lines as the name for my occupation. The next parameter I need to write is to define the runner. So I'm using runs done, and I'll be using the runner. Notice that I have an underline here because a tab is used in the editor. According to the syntax, we remember that there should be 2 spaces here. Just like that. And now all the errors are gone. Ransom, yes. Now we need to define the virtual machine. Let's take a look at the documentation to see what virtual machines we have available. So, GitHub hosted runners, remember? Told you that there are self-hosted ones and those on GitHub. Well, we're interested in the ones on GitHub. And let's take a look. Here they are. Ubuntu latest, Windows latest, macOS latest. If you need a specific version, you can check it out right here. So for Ubuntu, we have versions 22 and 20. For Windows, we have 2022, Windows 2019, macOS 12, macOS 11, and so on. And usually for such very simple tasks, I always use Ubuntu latest. You guys can also see the parameters here, right? I will. And usually for such very simple tasks, I always use Ubuntu latest. You guys can also see the parameters here. How much RAM, how much SSD is on this virtual machine, and moreover, you can see what software is installed on this virtual machine because some projects need Docker, some need Python, and so on. Instead of installing these through commands, since they might already be installed, you can just check if they're already on the virtual machine. So here it is, and we choose the machine that we selected. Well, for example, Ubuntu 22. Let's go into it. And here we see information about everything that's installed in it. Here they are. Docker, Git, Mercurial, PHP, and so on. Let's get back to our workflow. So we're running it on Ubuntu latest. Next, in the following parameter, we need to pass our steps. Here we write the keyword steps. In the steps, I need to define the actions that I'm going to take. Again, in the first workflow, I will have just 1 step. I'm adding spaces, so 2 more spaces. The first parameter, name, I need to set as the title for my step. Let it be display the text itself. The second parameter, I need to set the command itself, so I write run, and I'm going to use the PowerShell command. Went echo and I will enter the text itself. So my task is to output this phrase in the text through the terminal. Now our workflow is ready. The only thing is it's red for us, of course, because of these tabs. 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, and 1, 2, because it needs to be aligned here. It's wonderful. With it. Now everything is green for us. Our workflow is completely ready. What are the key parameters here, guys? These are the directories, GitHub Actions, where the workflows are, and in it we create our workflows, only as many as we need. For now we have just 1. Next we give this workflow a name, we set the event on, push, and jobs. In my case, I have only 1 job, so this is 1 job. If there were a second one, I would align the ID with the second job. And for the next job, I would again choose separate runs. And that's what my current job is about. My job is to take an Ubuntu virtual machine, type this command in the terminal, and we should see this text in the logs. Since my workflow will be triggered on push, I'm going to commit and push to the server now. I can do it through the terminal, or I can use this tool. This time I'll run it through this tool. I'm carefully writing a comment for the commit and selecting commit and push. So, our push is currently being sent to GitHub, and notice that in the Actions tab, our workflow is currently running. It finished in just 13 seconds. If we open it right now, the first and last are the jobs of GitHub Actions. This is happening at this very moment. And this center one is our job. Display some text is what we set for it. Here is our job. If I open it, in the logs, I see, pay attention. In the first one I see it tells me it's running the command echo samtext, and here I see the result samtext. The first workflow has successfully run. So what's in these jobs that GitHub creates? Notice that here it's doing nothing but setting up the infrastructure. And here it's just clearing some tasks. There are tasks when we need to write commands in multiple lines. So it's not about passing just one command but several. How do we implement this? Let me show you. Let's move here. We're writing the second step. We're going to do 2 steps in one job. We can either create 2 different jobs or have different steps in one job. Here, of course, we'll use different steps because if we create different jobs, it will set up a different infrastructure for each job. That's not quite right. Just like that, we set a name. For example, this will be the command "you have several terms." And we use run. Remember, in the previous lesson on syntax, we had this symbol. This symbol meant that we can write our text using line breaks, so to speak. So let's write it down. And in this lesson, we also got familiar with the fact that various tools are already installed on the virtual machine. Let's check what version of Node.js is currently being used exactly on this virtual runner, specifically at this moment on this particular virtual runner. 2 more spaces and I write the command. And besides Node.js, we'll also check the version of npm. That's how we wrote the command. So you don't like tabs here? That's it. This is how we wrote another step. It will be a separate command for us. We're committing and we carefully send it to the repository. Let's go to Actions and Securely. So, essentially, a new workflow actually starts again. If I go into this workflow, I can basically go in and watch how it runs while it's executing. You notice there was a cancel button here. Sometimes it happens that we occasionally make some mistake or error and it just goes into a loop. But this workflow has a duration. It has seconds, minutes, or even hours, or even days, or even weeks depending on the task. It lasts until it finishes. But GitHub provides a certain amount for free use, for example 2,000 minutes of execution for the free plan, so to speak, for a basic profile. And if you notice that a workflow has gotten stuck and it's just not showing up as completed, neither green nor red, but some yellow icon indicating it's still running, then manually click on cancel, or just select that workflow and delete it from here so it doesn't use your resources, otherwise you'll have to pay later. Or just select that workflow and delete it from here so it doesn't use your resources, otherwise you'll have to pay later. For this infrastructure, you see it completed again, 13 seconds. So when it comes to simple tasks, they use up little resources. All right, let's see what we have here. So the display, the text itself has also executed, and command and multiline. Let's see, Node is installed in version 18, npm is installed in version 9. Basically, you saw how easy and simple it is to create a workflow. We just create the necessary directory and then write our instructions in it according to the documentation. That's all. See you in the next lesson.